It's time now for the Morning Magazine, brought to you by the Riverview Hospital in Wisconsin Rapids and Comfort Air Heating, Cooling, Plumbing. Now, with the Morning Magazine, here's Carl Hilke.
Thank you, Jerry, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's show on AM 1320 as well as on the web at WFHR.com. And we also welcome our friends from River Cities Media who are taping our program for rebroadcast on your favorite cable channel later this week. Why are they here? Because Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink is here for the entire program, and we'll be taking your phone calls at area code 715-424-2600 or pound 1320 on your U.S. cellular phone. With that, we welcome the mayor of the city of Wisconsin Rapids, Zach Vruwink. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Carl.
Okay. Common Council last night, and some interesting items, I guess, from your standpoint. Anyone in particular stands out?
Well, I think we started at the top of the agenda. We had a nice presentation by the Heart of Wisconsin talking about an update on their activities. They spoke a little bit about the changes that they've made in terms of realignment following some comments I made at their board meeting and following the City Council's action regarding the room tax allocation last year. So it was assuring from them to hear what they've been doing to sort of pivot and be more nimble towards the business community. One of the big pieces that they've been focusing on is membership and growing their membership. And as a chamber, they're a membership organization, and they don't succeed without growth in their membership. So it was encouraging to hear that they've been able to grow their membership. I think at least 40 new members year over year, which is pretty significant. And they also talked a bit about events and how most of their events and their lens they're looking towards has got to have a benefit to the business community, and I can appreciate their approach in that respect.
Okay. With regards to that, you have to have a vital chamber of commerce when you're talking about your business development, and their entrepreneurial boot camp program has been a vital cog in that. I would think this is a group where you're two organizations that really need to work together with each other when it comes to economic development.
Yeah, no question. In fact, I mean, they're a very important piece of that. Without them, you have a hole, and I think that's what you're talking to in terms of the gap. There is also a number of initiatives. One particularly when people ask, what are we doing for the business community? Mm-hmm. What's the outreach efforts looking like? It's a program called Business Retention and Expansion Visits, and it's not unique to our community, but it's something that we've taken and polished for our own, and that's where a representative from the chamber, sometimes two people from the chamber, Adam in the Planning and Economic Development Office at City Hall, as well as Rick Murden from the Encourage Community Foundation, participate on going to businesses and asking a series of questions. In fact, they have a very large packet, but what it gets at is the core issues that the business may face, but it also gets at what are the opportunities. So each one of those individuals reflects a different lens. They're able to look at things a little bit differently, and they all have different areas of expertise. So by reaching out to those businesses, in fact, they're very long visits, too. I went on a couple myself, and they do take a number of hours because a lot of times business owners really appreciate the fact that you're able to get in, ask them questions, and it's an opportunity for everyone to learn from each other. From Adam's perspective at the city, what are we doing? Adam's able to talk about the revolving loan fund and how that may be of assistance to businesses that are in that growth stage where bank financing may not be the sole option, where we're looking to fill the gap, for example. And it's also putting a face with a name. Adam is also the chief permitter, if you will, in terms of his office requiring a lot of permits from building construction to fences to what have you. So having him at those meetings is very important because he's able to interface with business leaders on many levels.
What kind of comments do you get from businesses or complaints about what the city is doing or isn't doing or could do differently?
Sure. You know, I don't get a lot of the complaints from those visits. We did have an invitation that the chamber set up for the realtor community and the builders in the community. Maybe about a month ago. We met with a group of them in the morning to talk about what their challenges are, the regulatory challenges, permitting challenges. There was some dialogue in the meeting that talked about, what is the city doing differently? There's that question, always lingering question. It's always in the back of my mind. How are we changing the way we do it for the better. And that fostered some positive dialogue, because some of the business leaders in the community said in recent years, and not just really in the last year and a half that I've been in office, but there has been a transition, whether it be on the city council or business leaders or employees like Adam working with business community, taking a different stance on business opportunities, because there's a sense of desperation, right, in some respect, but there's also the sense of, okay, how can we make this prospect a reality? How can you make it from just the idea stage to actually, in some cases, turning dirt, whether it's a building or making improvements to an existing building or facility? But we did hear that the mindset and the support is changing from City Hall, and so that was assuring for me, because I didn't ask the question, but there were some business people in the room that did state that from a number of levels, whether it's real estate transactions or working with the assessor's office, that there has been some positive movement in that respect.
So that has to make you feel good, because it means people are noticing a change in attitude.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's hard to change attitudes because you don't change them overnight. And they take a long time to change. And so coming into that, it was assuring that if we're going to continue to make progress within City Hall, the attitudes have to change. And if that is working in our favor, then we're heading in the right direction.
One area of concern, and it's among maybe older business folks who remember this town when it only had a Chamber of Commerce and not a Convention and Visitors Bureau. And they go, isn't this like having two chambers of commerce? Don't we need to have these two people working together, or what? And isn't this kind of working at cross purposes? When you hear that kind of dialogue, and it's usually coming from someone a little older who remembers the good old days, as it were.
Of the board at the time,
and what's your response to that?
That was a challenge I issued both to Laura and to Melissa. They had to be very specific and focused on certain areas of their scope, and the chamber has done a great job, and I think the group Visit Wisconsin Rapids, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, has gotten much better at defining what it is that their area of expertise is and what their scope is. They're not in the business of providing business assistance and support in terms of the startup piece, so that referral or lead goes right back to the Chamber of Commerce. I think it's an evolution. It takes time in both those respects. The group is rebranded, the Visit Wisconsin Rapids, being very specific about being a tourism and marketing agency. And I think their resources, looking at the way their budget is expended, is much more now on the tourism and promotion side of things than maybe some of the pieces that historically may have caused a little bit of a question why we have two entities. Some people still question, and I do at times, why we have two separate physical presences in the community. And, I think it speaks to their mission and their direction and what they're meant to do. Very different. Sometimes, I think the Chamber wonders why they're on such a busy thoroughfare, because they get a lot of that visitor traffic and those people looking for direction and recommendations of places to eat or hotels to stay at, etc. So, but that's just the way it is. And they both have their physical offices that have kind of that retail presence to them. And I would say that, that's going to be an ongoing challenge, but the better they're able to stick to what it is that they're best at and what they're focused on, I think that the likelihood of that kind of impression will go away, that they won't be working towards necessarily the same common vision all the time.
Well, I think when the branding of Visit Wisconsin Rapids was a step in the right direction, and that is tourism.
Yeah, right.
And
right.
the Chamber of Commerce is business.
Yeah, and Melissa reminded us that it wasn't long ago that they had changed back to the Chamber of Commerce designation, which I think is very positive if they're trying to deal with the identity crisis that organization has faced in the past.
If you're just joining us on the Morning Magazine, welcome. We're visiting with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. He's here for the entire program, and our phone lines are open at 715-424-2600 or pound 1320 on your U.S. cellular phone. And we also welcome our friends from River Cities Media who are videotaping our program this morning. You mentioned you had some public hearings on on a zoning change from the Roosh companies. Explain the significance of this one.
Sure. And before I jump off of the last topic that we just discussed in terms of the two organizations, and I will remind listeners that the room tax allocation that was collected off of heads and beds essentially funds over 50% of the Visit Wisconsin Rapids group, and no longer funds the Chamber of Commerce, and that was a change that happened late last year. Right now we're in the budget stage, obviously, at City Hall, and so we're looking at what are the deliverables that we want organizations to work towards next year through the process of the budget. So not whether it's the Chamber of Commerce, we also fund the Humane Society, or Visit Wisconsin Rapids. So I'd extend an invitation to those that are listening that are interested in recommending certain pieces. From the Chamber of Commerce's perspective, we still fund their economic development efforts, but we're also going to be funding in more of their chamber operations. The other piece that we're going to be requesting funds from the City Council for is the REGI, the Regional Economic Growth Initiative, which the Chamber has spoken about in terms of their partnership with them, recognizing that there's a need for a guru or a deal maker to work at more of a global level and not have a bunch of other bureaucratic titles, let's say within City Hall, like we have in our Planning and Economic Development Office.
Okay. So you're not ignoring the Chamber, but also we should remind our listeners, there's state law involved when it comes to a rooms tax money.
There is. It's a bit gray right now, but there is a proposal I just saw, a similar proposal that I referenced last year during the room tax allocation conversation, that they're actually looking to make it an arbitrary percentage of what's collected go to tourism, marketing, and promotion. In which case, if that happens, we're already kind of in alignment with that. And that was kind of my approach last year by recommending the change that we made regarding the room tax allocation. We do retain about 13%, I believe it is, 13.25% of the room tax allocation for economic development efforts, which is what we're going to use likely to fund the REGI initiative.
Okay. Let's talk about this public hearing on this area to zoning change from R2 1 and 2 family residential to R3 multiple family residential. Sometimes these they look nebulous or nothing controversial, and then all of a sudden neighbors find out.
Yeah, definitely question marks are raised when you have a rezoning of this extent, because as Alderperson Rayom last night mentioned, that sometimes the next use, once you grant that, and I don't know if that's a apples to apples comparison off the top of my head or not, but you grant that rezoning and then somebody else purchases the property with a different intention, and that's where I think you have to be very careful about making sure that you've got the appropriate information from the requester going into those requests, because otherwise the Planning Commission can't in good faith make that decision effectively. Now, in this case, Shane Rouge, his father had developed a bunch of property across along Whitrock, and I don't know what the cross street would be. 12th Street is where the Rosewood Estates development is, and then if you go further, it would be west. You would pick up the piece where they put I believe it was geared towards 55 plus, and I believe his development was as well. This is definitely geared towards 55 and plus, meant to be one level, and he's using very similar plans from what we understand. We haven't seen the plans yet or approved any site plans. That'll be at our next month's Planning Commission, but he's looking at developing a number of buildings there.
Okay.
And there were some questions in terms of what the best approach is. The city has a tool available to the planning office, and that's the planned unit development, and some members, and I would tend to agree that might have been a little bit more effective way to approve it, so we don't have the potential because Shane doesn't own the property yet, that this was a contingency of his financing. So if he, for some reason, doesn't buy it, it's now been rezoned. Somebody else could pick it up and do something different. And that's why I always stress, the more time we have to prep the applicant for the best approach, the better all of this ends up. And unfortunately, that's the case with this situation. Is there's a timing piece. He wants to get working on one of the properties yet this fall. And so it's going to be some nicer development. We already have an example of it, and he claims that that's his similar approach is the one that his father developed on Whitrock. And so I commend him for taking the leap. He clearly understands there's a demand in the market. I'm not sure how long that demand will exist out there. I haven't seen any sort of housing snapshot, and that's something we're exploring to feel comfortable about how much housing is available and what needs are they being currently met.
That's a thing all cities are dealing with. I mean, if you have people, in fact, just read an article in yesterday's USA Today where it talked about the millennial generation isn't really interested in buying.
Right.
Because they have debts from college or whatever to pay off, and they're not interested in buying. And they're a generation, according to this article, that's used to renting. Right. Or using something for a short period of time when they need it and give it back.
Yep.
And
especially that's because they have commitment issues.
Yeah,
oftentimes
right.
They have lack of commitment. And there's also a piece, and I don't know if the article talked about it, but in choosing where the millennials want to live.
Yes, they did talk a little bit.
What was the article's take?
Well, basically, it talked about some of these developments are going in areas where young professionals like to, and they have the amenities that young professionals would like. They have a pool. It sounds like a resort almost, like sure. A weight room or stuff. Social activities. Okay. I mean, it's geared toward. In fact, they talked about this one company that takes companies or properties in distress or whatever and turns them around into these type of facilities. And it was kind of an interesting article in terms of what this means for the real estate industry.
It does, because it's not your single-family homes anymore. And I think you're even seeing that in small to mid-sized markets like Wisconsin Rapids, for example, where they're looking for that condo or that townhouse type piece where, like you say, ownership isn't necessarily in their interest, but they want to be close to certain amenities. They want to be close to recreation. They want to be close to restaurants and entertainment and that type of thing.
Okay. We had an election for a member to the Waterworks and Lighting Commission. Mm-hmm. Who is the winner?
We had 3 interested parties, and the winner was John Bergen, who, my understanding, had some history in working in the paper industry. Mm-hmm. And by a vote of 5-3, there were 2 members of the 3 that were nominated, and John received 5 votes of the council.
Okay, and his term will last...
I believe it starts in October, and it's going to replace the chairperson, Ellen Dahl, and so they'll elect a new chairperson, I believe, at their October meeting. And Ellen has served for many decades, from what she tells me, and I think, we owe her a great deal of gratitude. I know the Waterworks and Lighting Commission really appreciates her dedication to service because she's been very, very dedicated in her years on the commission.
Your predecessors... in office have often talked about, encouraged people to apply for these positions and put their names in the hat and get involved. Are we seeing more of that, do you think?
We saw 3 individuals in this case.
That's why I asked.
The Waterworks and Lighting Commission is a challenge in many respects. And one of them is their meetings are in the afternoon on a Wednesday at 1 o'clock. So that, in my opinion, it limits a bit of who might be able to serve on that commission based on their schedules. So, that's one challenge, I think, for people that want to serve on the commission. The other piece is sometimes people say that there should be an intimate knowledge or at least a general understanding of business practices and that sort of thing. So that may limit another subset of individuals looking to seek the commission. But not to say that anybody can't throw their name in the hat. In fact, we'd encourage it as well, just like others have. It's very important that you have people that want to serve.
You also had a council meeting last week.
Yes.
A special meeting.
Yeah.
And that regarded a recommendation of the Citizen Advisory Committee regarding a potential community development block grant application. What does this involve?
Well, community development block grants haven't been new. It's not new to the city. I think this would be our 3rd application. We've received 2 or 3. I know Nathaniel from the Tribune was working on a story, and so he was doing some of the history on it. We did have to pull together a meeting of the Citizens Advisory Committee that's based on our ordinances that were adopted in 88 and then revised in 93, which indicated that any community development block grant we pursue has to have a citizens advisory committee on it, and they have to make a recommendation to the city council. So I'm not a member of the citizens advisory committee, but this opportunity came very fast moving. It wasn't as fast moving when we originally talked about it over a year ago, and that was because it used to be it was housed within Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation.
Okay.
Well, anybody that's been paying attention has been seeing that there's been much transition and activity and shakeup, for lack of a better word, at WEDC, and this was one of the programs that they had transferred from the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation to the Department of Administration, the DOA. And so when the DOA received it, I believe in late July was when the transition happened, they then converted from a rolling application cycle anytime throughout the year to a September deadline, September 13th this year. So for us, it was a decision that I was faced with in terms of recommending to staff to get working on it, was the sense that we either apply for it for 2014 and 2015, or we're going to be in a position for 2015 or 2016. So in the spirit of time and trying to get some activity to happen, the Citizens Advisory Committee decided that based on the downtown TIF area and based on the amount of blighted property, vacant property, and the like, and quite frankly, the decline of the tax base in that area, that something needs to start happening in that area. So they decided to recommend to the council to pursue the community development block grant. It's a $500,000 grant is what was applied for. Now, it's federal funds that pass through the state, and they determine, based on a scoring criteria, of how likely or how much need a community has.
What area is this? Is this mainly?
This is the downtown TIF area, so that goes from borders the expressway, crosses the river, comes up along. It does not include the former Preway building, but it includes some of the manufacturing property around there and snakes back along the river again.
Okay. How might this affect or help enhance what the Community Foundation is doing with the old Tribune Building?
Yeah, the Tribune Building project, from my perspective, it will be a catalyst for further development. And I've said this all along, I don't care where the development happens necessarily in the community, as long as we have positive community development, and that's what we're going to see with Encourage's acquisition of the Tribune Building, from what I understand. The community designs, community-driven focus, community-driven project, that it's really going to take those that show up, have a really strong chance of those ideas, from what I understand, to making it a reality in that building.
I was going to ask you your thoughts about that. They're excuse the pun, they're encouraging the public to get involved.
Yeah.
We bought the building, but we bought it to protect it. Now we want all of you to tell us how you would like to see it develop.
Yeah, it's a tremendous opportunity for residents to participate, and I think as somebody that believes very strongly that residents should be given many opportunities to voice their opinion and to really affect the outcome of certain decisions. And this is one of those tangible examples where somebody will be able to show up to a series of meetings. I understand they've got 4 meetings planned, starting in October 8th, I believe.
Yes.
The council took a tour. Was supposed to take a tour last night. Unfortunately, none of them could make it, I guess. But they're community design, community-centered process where residents are able to show up and to voice their opinion. And quite frankly, it's a very large building, lots of space, and it could be many things.
And it's in good health, from what I understand, architecturally. We have our first caller before our first break, so let's get right to the phone lines. Good morning. You're on the Morning Magazine with Mayor Vruwink.
Good morning, gentlemen, and thank you for the show. Mayor, could you explain again? I think I have a brain fade here, but tell me again about TIF districts, and is that revolving loan? Is that, because we do have some properties in that area, tell me, is it 3%? And I'll listen off the air, and if you can just tell me potential timeline, and I thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Okay.
So the city does have the revolving loan fund. It isn't owned by the city or housed by the city anymore. It's part of the regional fund, which includes 9 counties from actually Mauston's trying to get in right now in Adams County and Juneau County. I believe Adams is in, Juneau's trying to get in all the way north. And so that loan fund is at 2% interest, and that's available to any business Most of the funds have been defederalized, meaning you don't have a job creation component anymore. So if somebody's looking for gap financing, if they're short on bank financing for a certain project, whether it's redevelopment or facade improvement or manufacturing, if they're looking to buy equipment or purchase a building, real estate's commonly seen in that. We've had activity about 3 loans in the last number of months. So that loan is housed within the region. Up to $200,000 is available at local control. So we have an industrial development commission that hears those requests, that meets to deny or to approve the request, which I chair that meeting. So that's the revolving loan fund. That's a tool available within the TIF or anywhere really in the city. In fact, anybody in the county can access that as well. Now, the TIF district piece, the downtown TIF was created in 2005, I believe, or a bit before, during Mayor Jerry Bach's term, for a number of projects that he had identified in the downtown area. The TIF today is still set up. It's set up for a period of, I believe, 20 years. So we've got, actually 24 years, I believe. So we may have 18 years left on it. And essentially, that TIF has only funded infrastructure projects. So it pre-funded, essentially, the West Grand reconstruction. So it was borrowed against that TIF, knowing that eventually that increment, any increment that's developed, whether it's new construction or redevelopment in that area, any new tax increment that's generated would go back to fund that TIF. So there are a number of TIF-eligible expenditures, whether it's infrastructure, like roads and light poles and anything that's related to infrastructure. But there's also other things that can be incentives. So if you're trying to incentivize a certain development to happen, some of those things are also TIF. The other TIF district that we have runs in the Rapids East Commerce Park, and that has also funded a lot of the infrastructure improvements. One of the companies that we're in discussions with in terms of expansion in that TIF would likely be incentivized through some job creation that they're projecting with infrastructure. They need an additional road, and so they need some additional water capacity. And so there's a possibility that those two could be TIF-eligible expenditures. So essentially, they've created the increment because they've built new property and they've grown their tax increment, so that financially allows us to capture that increment and send it right back to that local area.
Can you reveal what company we're talking about?
Well, it's an existing company, and they haven't talked about any public job growth, but they're what they tell us their 5-year plan might be their 3-year plan, and et cetera.
Okay.
So,
well, that's good news. Yeah. I mean, it's good to hear that there's a company projecting some expansion and some growth.
Right, and it's all predicated on what the city and the Water and Light Commission can do to meet some of their infrastructure challenges. So we've got a great wastewater treatment facility. This expansion wouldn't rely so much on the wastewater piece as it may have in the past, but it relies more on the water and some of the fire suppression challenges they face. So, it's all going to matter if the chips fall appropriately in our community. It could be, as few as 10 jobs, or it could be something much larger. However, we need to get the infrastructure pieces to be had, and that was a meeting we just had last Friday.
Okay. Well, we're going to take our first break. You're listening to The Morning Magazine on AM 1320, as well as on the web at WFHR.com, and we also welcome our friends from River Cities Media today. The Morning Magazine, as always, is brought to you by Riverview Medical Center. With you, it's personal and comfort air.
Here's Carl Hilke.
Thank you, Jerry, and welcome back, everybody, to today's show, which features Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink for the entire show. The phone lines are open at 715-424-2600, pound 1320 on your U.S. cellular phone. If you have any concerns, one that I've gotten some calls about and piqued my interest because I drive by there every day was all the tree removal at the airport. And I guess this has to do with flight safety and an agency called the FAA.
Yeah, last year, dating back to about mid-year last year, we had received a flyover from the FAA, and that's their spot checks, if you will, in the airports. That indicated that they had to shut down the Pappy system, which is the lighting if you're approaching the approach, landing at the approach coming over the wastewater treatment plant. And so that Pappy Light being shut off affected many, many pilots. In fact, it determines that it kind of removes a level of safety, so they're no longer able to use that approach, so they have to use another approach. So the issue for us is that it could allow or disallow somebody from landing at our airport because that runway is our primary runway, and that's the one that serves any of the big passenger the turboprops, jets, etc. So So we approached, following the flyover, we attempted to pinpoint most of the tall trees that we thought were tallest. However, there's some elevation changes as well there one wouldn't notice if you're just standing there. So what were tall to some were more, some others were too tall that were missed. So instead of topping most of them and getting by with that, the FAA did another flyover and determined that it wasn't enough. So with that said, we figured instead of pinpointing these trees, because we also at the same time had a company called MSA that is contracted with the state to do a airport layout plan update, and that takes a look at the whole airport, a snapshot for the next 20 years, they say, in terms of future growth. So while they were on the ground, they used their engineering tools to pinpoint the clusters of trees that were just too tall. And we have to be, in terms of be compliant to the state and obviously to the FAA to keep the runways open, but for state funding to be in compliance so there's no penetrations into the airspace, particularly in the runway protection zone. It's RPZ. So those RPZs are, I almost call them like a trapezoid from the end of the runway. So particularly for the trees along First Street where those pines are, largely mostly pines, that we stopped cutting at, I can't remember the street name, maybe Grove, right in that area. That's the end of the runway protection zone. So we stopped there. There was no need for us to cut any more of the rest of the piece because it didn't affect that runway. All of the trees that you saw on the wastewater treatment plant property and the Humane Society all had been also in the area of penetrating that safety zone. So when the state gave us their recommendation, the FAA had already shut down the Pappy Lights, which was going on over a year, that we had to do something. So there was a letter that I sent off, and that's what you had a copy of, to all adjacent property owners, anybody that bordered the airport property, as those were in the primary affected area. So there will be further select cutting going on airport property in a number of areas. There's a couple of other areas that might be seeing clear cuts, but for the most part, most of the clear cut area, particularly on the city side of things, has been taken care of. The big lingering question, and that was referenced in the letter that I wrote, was whether or not anything can be replanted. And the answer we've received is yes. It just it can't penetrate the airspace as quickly.
Because this is, when we're talking about, this is the potential of an airplane clipping one of these trees, right, either on takeoff or on landing.
That's right. That's right. And most of the new aircraft have GPSs, but it's very expensive, and most of the aircraft that use that airport do not have the GPS approaches in them.
Okay.
Question?
Yeah, let's get to the phones. Oh, someone... Okay, so...
Yeah, so the question is, really the danger is to have an airport in someone's front yard, and frankly, not one of us wants to have that happen, because that wouldn't be a black eye on, number one, the airport commission, because we wouldn't have been in compliant, not right, having that taken care of. But also just doing our due diligence. You've got to manage that timber around the airport property. Most of the airport, except for the terminal building, is in other jurisdictions. So the airport commission is the governing body of that piece, with representatives from all of the 4 neighboring townships and villages. So we will be replanting items, particularly around the wastewater treatment plant. I know that was something that it really sticks out now, and they kind of pride themselves of trying to be more covert about their operations and not have to be so right, in many ways, right, physically and the aroma and everything else. So,
right.
I think we're just looking at what it is the next piece. So a lot of those stumps will be ground out, and they're going to be taken care of. They take pride also in manicuring that property and making it look nice.
Who got the lumber from all of this?
It's actually being sold. New Page was the highest bidder. There was a timber sale working with the county, and we had 2 bidders, and the timber sale, the New Page was the one. And so that's why you see the logging equipment. You don't just see a tree care service in there. Just the sheer number of trees, it made sense for us to recapture some of that revenue from the sale of the lumber.
Because someone was asking me about that, and I said, no, if you look at it, there... that's a logging operation.
Yeah, it is, exactly. Yep, it's Earth Forestry is working on behalf of New Page. Their New Page is a subsidiary that does forest cropland. So we had a competitive bidding process, and they will be wrapped up sometime next year. There is some of the zones where they can't get to based on their schedule and also the weather. So there's a zone associated with every one of the cutting areas, and the most intrusive, I would say, are the ones that we saw in the treatment plant and former Humane Society property.
Are there going to be private property owners affected? Any of their trees?
That's the next phase. Yes, there are some trees that we did top that we didn't get them all, from what I understand from what the FAA tells us, on private property. So it'd be, again, in the runway protection zones, far less amount of trees than the logging operation that we undertook, but they will be required to take them down. And we have the ordinance that was adopted in the 70s and the 80s, I believe the 70s, that dictates the ability for the commission to require that to happen.
Okay. What about someone who says, oh boy, I don't know how am I going to afford this?
Well, it depends on when the tree was planted. If it was planted before 72, I believe it's the commission's responsibility. Anything planted after 1972, it's the property owner. How do you determine it? Well, you'd have to have someone give you the best faith and basically count the rings, from what I understand, that are inside the tree. But the commission, and I want to speak for the commission because they haven't ruled on this, but likely we would do the same approach we did last year. Any trees that are on private property, from the inconvenience and all that sort of thing, the commission may pay for that. It's just that the ordinance dictates that the property owner pays if it's after 1972. Okay.
Another problem that, it could be viewed as a problem and maybe an opportunity, because we've heard word that Warzinski's is going to be closing shop.
Oh, okay.
And we know already there's a number of other open dealerships, vacant car lots and the like in the city. And this isn't new to Wisconsin Rapids. Other cities are facing the same problem.
Right.
What do you do to redevelop these things? Because many of them are not going to ever go back to being a car lot
dealership.
Again.
Well, yeah, and they're functionally obsolete, as the term is. They don't have any real higher and any better use than an auto dealership, and that's what you're referring to. It's also a concern. In fact, the city assessor caught me on my way up to my office yesterday afternoon when I was coming back to City Hall from a meeting, and stated to me if I had heard anything regarding some acquisition. There were some interested parties in at least one of the properties, but there are others that are going to become vacant. So part of it is, I think, from the city's standpoint, what we can do is we have brownfields elimination dollars from the state or from the federal government, the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, granted those funds to us. Gosh, at least a year ago, it might be 2-3 years ago now, that we've been working on it. So it allows us to identify which properties or parcels have brownfield contamination on them. If they do, they're less attractive to somebody coming in and redeveloping them, right? Because there's a cost associated with remediating any sort of contamination. So that's one approach that we can take, is to take a look at those. The other piece is from the sheer tax base. Because the buildings are functionally obsolete, anybody that buys them is going to buy them far less than assessed value or fair market value. So that creates an issue for the assessor's office in terms of determining what comparables exist, particularly on A Street. And so once you start devaluing others based on the sale, it's a domino effect with other properties. And there's some other behemoths. The former Roadway Inn, which is in receivership right now, is also another vacant property that, with the former chalet out front, the restaurant, functionally obsolete. Unless somebody wants to put a restaurant and then put it a hotel, or occupy the property again as a hotel, there's not a whole lot else you can do in a current form. So one approach could be the similar piece, another approach with the CDBG funding, the Community Development Block Grant, for us. Now, none of those properties are in a TIF. However, not to say that we can't create a TIF there to recapture some of that. In fact, there's some new state legislation right now that if a TIF is created and at a certain value, which those properties all have an assessed value to them today as they're vacant, if that is devalued because of ongoing vacancy or demolition, you can actually devalue that TIF. That's not allowed by state law right now. So that would allow us to drop that and then recapture again any increment that's created because of new development. So, and there's only so many CVS-type properties and parties to go around to take those big corners and those big parcels. So we have to look at our land use planning and the comprehensive plan and to say, what could future use be there? And I think inaction isn't an option. I don't know if the private market, the private sector in this community can do it all. Given the number of properties that are there, there's only a few developers that are really aggressive and some more than others willing to take gambles. And to buy an old former used car dealership or a new car dealership and to do something with it is a pretty big gamble. Other than that, the brownfields elimination and making sure there's no contamination there, and then redeveloping, buying the properties, greenfielding them in some cases and redeveloping.
I mean, are you basically removing the old structures that are on there? And
because it's very cost prohibitive to any developer to tear down old buildings.
And that's probably why they look, I'm not interested in that. I'd have to take down this whole thing.
Buy a greenfield before. Now, we had two prospects, from what I understand, that contacted us for some development of some larger parcels. So if they get to a point where they're very serious, but that becomes cost prohibitive, I wouldn't say it's out of line for the city to consider some involvement in paying for some of the demolition of the old buildings. Now, we don't know who the prospect is, and we don't know how serious they are, so there's a lot more to be said. But I think from a city standpoint, if you ask me what's my position on how aggressive we want to be, well, frankly, vacant buildings serve nobody any good. And whether or not they're residents that have property values or if they're commercial buildings, it doesn't serve the community any benefit. So we're going to have to take some action if the private market or the private market doesn't take any sort of stance on it.
You mentioned, okay, we talk about car dealerships, but you mentioned the old motel and the old chalet restaurant. I mean, unless you're going to put in and use that existing property the way it is right now, there's a whole lot of there that would have to be either removed or
tons of
changed.
Expense, right? Yeah. So, and I don't know from a health and a code standpoint at what point those buildings become such a vacancy that they're violations. And I don't.
That's my other question.
There's certainly nuisance violations. People would call them in terms of code with the growing of the weeds and some of those pieces that are far unattractive. But I would say that we're going to have to take a position on that. And so going through the budget process this year, part of it relates to the community development block grant for us to redevelop blighted and vacant properties, is to take a look at what other tools we can employ. Because, as you say, we're not the only municipality that has a vacant used or a new car dealership in our main thoroughfares. Stevens Point had one right by the campus, and they're now seeing some redevelopment with, I think, the Klosinski Clinic there near the UWSP campus and some others. So, again, greenfielding those sites and making it to much different and better use.
Yeah, it's good. In other words, what you're talking about, in order to make it attractive to an investor, the city's going to have to invest.
Yep.
And that's what a public-private partnership usually involves.
Right. And they're all in private ownership yet, so I don't know what conversations, I don't own the property, nor does the city, so the private owners may have some momentum in terms of trying to get somebody to purchase it, but highest and best use has always got to be in kind of our purview as we start looking. I mean, those car dealerships were there for many years, right?
Right.
The next use is going to be there for likely many years, so we've got to be a little bit selective in making sure it's the right fit for the right place.
You mentioned there was some inquiries. Who usually does these type of inquiries? Is it the business owner themselves, the corporate CEO, or is it a site recruiter who's going around looking for sites on behalf of a company?
Sure, any number of those. One is business owners, if they're a small enough company. If they're a national piece, they typically have a broker or some sort of real estate individual that's going to do site selection, and that's the CVS piece was a real estate broker. And I really commend them from what they did on A Street. They could have done something far less than what they did in terms of landscaping and development on that corner with the new CVS. So I think it begs mentioning that if national retailers can invest in the aesthetics and the look and the feel of some of those parcels, local developers can as well. And so whether they're local or national, I think they all have different groups. The piece that we had recently was a builder, a developer, that was speaking on behalf, and so they were looking at sites throughout central Wisconsin to site a particular facility. So that's really who it is. I'll be attending a piece that the Chamber has attended in the past in October, called a deal-making conference, where a lot of national retailers and national chains will be at, whether they're restaurant, service, retail, what have you. So that'll be in a day in the first week in October that I will be at with some representatives from the Chamber to talk about what sort of prospects we might have. So we'll see what happens.
Okay. We got to take our last break, and then we'll be back with more. You're listening to a conversation with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. The phone lines are still open at 424-2600 or pound 1320 on your U.S. cellular phone. Back with more right after this. Well, welcome back to the Morning Magazine and our conversation with Wisconsin Rapids Mayor Zach Vruwink. We only have one call today, so, the phone lines are open, 424-2600, pound 1320 on your U.S. cellular phone. I don't know, maybe I anticipated a bunch of your phone calls.
I guess so. Hopefully we did a better job of informing me.
Okay, man, that's good. You mentioned it's budget time and everything else. We talked about the WEDC. Mm-hmm. We wanted to get on their list so they could help market our sites.
Yes.
How are we doing in that area?
We haven't made an official announcement yet, but we were successful in moving into the next stage. So we're going to have a company called Deloitte Consulting out of Chicago, I believe their Chicago office, or a worldwide site locator that works on behalf of companies that are looking to site in certain communities with certain amenities. So we were successful. In fact, they're going to be sending a team here, I believe, on October 2nd. So that announcement, we haven't made an announcement really, as I say, but we were successful in moving in the next phase of that. So we're going to have our very objective and hopefully constructive criticism from the site locators that are going to be visiting Wisconsin Rapids, who do these site visits all across the world, to tell us what they think on many respects, from the entryways to the community to the business park amenities to what have you. So we're very interested in their perspective.
Okay, let's get to the phones. We have a caller on the line. Good morning. You're on the air with Mayor Vruwink.
Good morning, Mayor. My question is on water and light utility. Where are we at with, pulling the reins in on them? I understand they have a much better health insurance, medical, whatever. They say they're always concerned about the ratepayers over there, yet they seem to be an entity of themselves. And where's the city at with getting better control over them? They seem to be, in my opinion, do what they want to do when they want to do it.
Sure. Thanks for the call. In terms of more oversight or decision-making, exercising that decision-making over the water and light utility, that would come on behalf of action of the City Council. And I don't know of anything specific in terms of steps that need to be taken, but our ordinances reflect the Water and Light Commission has been designated as the entity to make the decisions on behalf of the City Council. So that would have to change if you're looking to, which I think what you're speaking to in terms of less autonomy for the Water and Light Commission and more oversight by the City Council.
Well, I don't know what your opinion is. I know you've been at some of those meetings. To me, it seems like the commission is just, Jim Brown and his staff. It's a commission that just rubber stamps everything. In my opinion, I'm not saying that's the case, but I've been going to several meetings now the last 6 months or a year, and there's hardly any objection to anything, and the commission doesn't seem to be doing their job as far as the oversight from what I understand their job to be.
Sure, and I appreciate your perspective. As you were there last night and saw that there was a new commissioner elected, and so I would encourage you to get in contact with that new commissioner to understand their perspective and what their approach is going to be in terms of their service on the Water and Light Commission. I believe strongly in fresh perspectives, and I think whether it was John or Lee that were approved last night, both of them represent new and fresh perspectives on the commission, and so I'd encourage you to get in touch with the new commissioner to see what their approach is going to be.
All right, thank you for your time.
Thank you for your call. Okay, and as you mentioned, it's budget time. So how is the city looking budget-wise?
We're a little bit delayed in the process, not for any particular reason other than a number of parts. One of them was health insurance, and we had instituted a new health insurance plan, and so we had what was called open enrollment for individuals to choose between one of two plans, and so that closed September 8th, and then it took another week or so to get that information to the finance department. So they're working on pulling all that information into the individual budgets. I did have 2 meetings yesterday with the 2 large departments, police and fire, to talk about their budget requests. And frankly, from what the finance director tells me, he's a little bit behind in where he'd like to be. Not to say that we're behind in the process, just where we feel more comfortable. And secondly, that because we haven't seen, and I haven't seen all of the requests yet, Street Department finally got their request in yesterday morning, which is a very large budget as well. So depending on where those requests fall and what we have available in terms of net new construction numbers or equalized value, and the like, that and with levy limits, really, that'll dictate where things fall. So haven't gotten the axe out,
Okay.
for lack of a better word, but I think we're waiting to see the other requests, and I should know very shortly in the next 3 weeks, probably definitely before the next radio show, as we like to get a budget to the Finance Committee the first week of October. For them to start preliminarily reviewing things and reviewing the requests.
Okay. Well, I guess you're going to be very busy. You and the
budget time is a busy time. Tons of meetings,
and it's becoming more and more of a challenge for municipalities across the country, as it were.
Yep.
Okay, well, I appreciate your time this morning and want to thank our callers and
all the listeners. Thank you for tuning in. And if there's anything we didn't cover over the phone, feel free to send me an email, give me a call, and we can address the concern.
Okay, thank you, sir. And with that, we'll wrap up the Morning Magazine. We'll join CBS after this.